Welcome to this poetry lesson on the poem The Discardment by Alan Paton. This is one of the poems that is in the current IEB Poetry syllabus for 2023 to 2025. As always, when it comes to poetry, poetry is subjective, and while I have tried to be as comprehensive and detailed as possible, you will find other observations and other perspectives as you do a bit more research on the poem for yourself. And it's not to say that those are wrong or those are not relevant. By all means, please consider all the perspectives and all of the observations that you actually do find as you study this poem for yourself. But remember that at the end of the day, with scene poetry, you always need to be able to substantiate your observations and your perspectives with what is actually in the poem. You can't just make it up as you go along. Another reminder that this YouTube lesson, again, does cover as much as possible, but you do actually need to put the effort into studying this poem and making sure you understand it for yourself and that you are able to actually write on it. Jumping into the poem and jumping into the poet specifically, we're going to have a quick look at who Alan Paton was and kind of what his worldview was and what his ideology was. This is very important for poems like The Discardment that are all about a time in our country's history, being apartheid, when people were standing up against the injustice of the regime, where people were making their voices heard about what the apartheid regime was doing to people of color. And Alan Paton is one of those poets where it's important to know where he's coming from. It's important to know his background, and kind of his ideology as he was writing this poem. So he was a South African, born and bred, born in 1903, died in 1988, and was born in Pietermaritzburg. He was a teacher and a principal at an urban black boys' school during apartheid, and this was quite important because he was very, very actively involved in fighting against the apartheid regime, and he was very interested in introducing humane reforms and making sure that people, had access to good education and that kind of stuff. In 1930, he joined the South African Institution of Race Relations, and he was very actively involved in the politics of the time as he gave evidence at Nelson Mandela's treason trial in 1964. People of an earlier generation might know him most famously for his novel Cry the Beloved Country, and if you haven't read that novel, I strongly recommend that you go read it and kind of just see what a great novelist he was. It's a beautiful book about our country, and the story is so engaging and so captivating. But it's important to understand that Alan Paton was somebody who was against the apartheid regime, who was against the apartheid government. And him being a white man, being against the apartheid government, obviously this was quite a risky thing to do. And so having the courage to stand up and to use his career, to use his art as a way to stand up against the regime, it's actually such a privilege to be able to study his poetry. So when we look at this poem, many people do classify it as a protest poem. And protest poetry, the aim of it is to point out problems within our society or to reflect on problems in our society by looking at current events or circumstances or issues. And you need to ask yourself by the end of this poem, do you feel it's a protest poem? Do you feel that maybe it's more of a reflection and not necessarily protesting anything? That's completely up to you, but make sure that whatever you decide, you can substantiate it from the poem itself. So when we look at the title of this poem called Discardment, when we look at the word, it means to throw something away, to discard something. And discard is quite a heavy word. It's quite an in-depth word. It shows that there's no real sentimentality attached to that thing that you were discarding. There's no real sense of wanting to hold on to the thing. You discard it, you get rid of it, whatever. And so you need to think about, what is this going to mean for us as we go into this poem that is titled The Discardment, which means to throw things away, to let go of things that have no meaning anymore. So let's have a quick read through the poem and actually, really get into the poem. So The Discardment by Alan Paton. We gave her a discarment, a trifle, a thing no longer to be worn, its purpose served, its life done. She put it on with exclamations, her eyes shone, she called and cried, the great bulk of her pirouetted, she danced and mimed, sang snatches of a song. She called out blessings on her native tongue. She called out to her fellow servants, the strangers and passers-by, to all the continents of Africa, to see this wonder, to participate in this intolerable joy. And so for nothing is purchased loyalty and trust, and the unquestioning obedience of the earth's most rare simplicity. So for nothing, the destruction of a world. So when we have a look at the message and the meaning behind this poem, we see that it's kind of got three main things that it's dealing with here. Number one, it is within the context of the apartheid era, the apartheid regime. And so we are looking at it from that perspective of a speaker who is in this regime or in this era, and the person that he's interacting with who is also in this era, and how apartheid has affected both the speaker and the person that they are giving this thing to. We see that there is a sense of superiority here. You know, the speaker does believe that he is superior to the woman receiving this item that he's throwing away. And this is obviously going to speak to our social classes, and the social classes that were created by apartheid, they were obviously based on race. So if we look at kind of what's happening in the poem, it's most likely describing a white family giving their black help clothes or another item that they no longer use, an item that they were discarding and decided to give to this black woman who is in their employ. And I've said here, the speaker is almost humbled by this woman's joy at receiving these items. But as we read the poem a bit more and as we go on in the poem, I want you to ask yourself, is it a moment of humility, or is it a moment of him having to confront his privilege and being very uncomfortable by confronting his privilege? You know, so it's not really humility, it's more, oh, I actually see where I am in life, and this makes me very uncomfortable to have to deal with that. You can decide, humility or uncomfortable realization of privilege. Diction in this poem, I mean, the diction in any poem is very important. Diction, just a reminder, is the choice of words. And the question you want to ask yourself when it comes to diction is always, why does the poet choose this word and not another word? Because remember, words have power, they have connotations, they have meaning. And so if I say I'm angry with you, obviously that has its meaning attached to it. But if I say I'm infuriated by you, it's a bit of a deeper meaning, a bit more sense of anger that is evoked by the word infuriated. And so when it comes to the diction in this poem, the poet has very carefully chosen words that are going to have certain connotations, that are going to make you think a certain way. And so you want to see, how are the words being used influencing your perspective of the woman who is receiving the item that is going to be discarded? How are the words that have been chosen influencing you? How are they maybe changing your mind? How are they making you see this person? Diction in this poem is incredibly important, and you must be aware of it. So as we jump into this poem and we go line by line by line, you're welcome to just pause quickly, kind of figure out how I've made the notes here. So it's the first three lines, and then there are analysis lines in between that, and obviously the colors all relate to each other, so you can go along those lines. So the first three lines say, "We gave her a discarment, a trifle, a thing no longer to be worn, its purpose served, its life done." The aim of these three lines is to kind of emphasize how worthless this item is. Do you see that the speaker is saying the same thing 4 times? It's a discarment, it's a trifle, it's a thing no longer to be worn, its purpose is served, and its life is done. That's 4 things that he said now to emphasize how worthless this item is. All right, so it's very important that you see that from the beginning, he's telling us this thing that I was going to throw away, it's junk, it's nothing, because discardment, it's junk. A trifle, it means a trifle means something that is of little importance. It's meaningless, it's a little knick-knack. A thing no longer to be worn, its purpose served, its life done. There, that its purpose served, its life done, he's used personification even, by giving life, by giving purpose to this inanimate object, to show that once it did have significance, but now it's done, its purpose is served, its life is over. And the reason why I emphasize this from the beginning is because you want to ask yourself, okay, you've spent time, speaker, telling us how irrelevant, how worthless this thing is, so why give this thing to somebody else? If you are trying to make me understand how worthless it is, why should I feel happy that you're giving this to somebody? Why? What possesses you to give something worthless to somebody else? And you can start asking yourself, are we already seeing that idea of superiority where, okay, well, me in my social class, I can't use this thing, but this woman who the speaker might think is inferior to her, she can use it, and so I'll give it to her. And so we ask ourselves, if you spend so much time emphasizing its worthlessness, why give it to somebody? So we gave her a discarment, that we gave her, we, probably the speaker, likely a wealthy white family, her is the black help or the black woman who is receiving this item. And the pronouns immediately create a sense of division between the speaker and the woman receiving the item. And we see as well, we gave her. There's no real feature in the her here. Her could be anyone. There's no identifier. And this speaks to the lack of identity that black people felt during apartheid, where they didn't have an identity. It was just this group of people. And we want to ask ourselves, the diction that's used here, we gave her. Giving implies a meaningful interaction. It implies wanting the person to have this thing. So is this a moment of generosity that's driven by guilt? Is it something more? Why emphasize how worthless the thing is, but then use a word like we gave her the discardment? Moving on to the next two lines, very juxtaposed, very contrasted to the first three lines. It continues and says, she put it on with exclamations. Her eyes shone. She called and cried. The great bulk of her pirouetted. She danced and mimed, sang snatches of a song. So as I said, it's very juxtaposed. The first three lines really focus on that idea of worthlessness, life served, it's dead, it's finished. And now we go into this woman's celebration of receiving this thing, and it's full of life. It's full of vigor, it's full of energy, and it feels a little bit like a jump scare of, okay, but this thing was so worthless, why is she celebrating the way that she is? And that's kind of the main point here, is she's got this very sincere reaction of extreme joy that the speaker is a bit amused by. He finds it a bit peculiar that she's chosen to celebrate it in this way. The reason I say it's sincere joy is because she put it on with exclamations. Her eyes shone. When somebody is not, excited about something, when somebody is not happy about something, they might look happy, but you're not going to see it in their eyes. And so the fact that her eyes are shining really shows you that she is sincere in what she is doing here. So she called and she cried. There's some beautiful alliteration there to just show you how excited she is about this. And then he goes on to say, the great bulk of her pirouetted, she danced and mimed, sang snatches of a song. It's this almost childlike excitement, this almost childlike joy. She's pirouetting, she's spinning in circles, she's dancing, she's singing at receiving this item that, remember, just a couple of lines ago, he described as completely worthless. Just a little bit on diction there quickly. He refers to here as the great bulk of her pirouetted. It's a bit of an odd physical description. I'm not sure about you, but I personally don't want to be referred to as a great bulk. And you need to ask, does it show prejudice? Is it trying to kind of identify her with features that he believes belong to a certain group of people? What does this mean by calling her a great bulk? It could also refer to the fact that, this is a woman who is in his house, is possibly cleaning up, that kind of stuff, but he just sees her as this bulk, as this entity near him. Once again, there's no distinguishing features. There's no distinguishing identification. It's just this loss of identity for this person who's received this thing, and he can't understand why she's excited by receiving this thing. So you need to look at how the speaker has described the woman who's receiving this item, how he is, viewing her. And once again, like I said earlier, what does that make you think of this person receiving the item? How does it influence your thinking? He continues describing how she's so excited about receiving this item, and he says, she called out blessings on her native tongue. She called out to her fellow servants, the strangers and passers-by, to all the continent of Africa, to see this wonder, to participate in this intolerable joy. So we see quite a bit of hyperbole, and it gives that sense of how is she this excited about something that's going to be thrown away, because we see she called out blessings, she called out to her fellow servants. That beautiful anaphora, she called out, shows that this is not an excitement that she's keeping to herself. No, she wants to share this. She wants everybody to know about her excitement, and it's a loud, jubilant, energetic celebration. And there where it says she's calling out to her fellow servants, that's an apartheid marker. It's the jobs and the identity of black people of the time, where her peers are fellow servants the way she is, because the apartheid regime didn't allow them to be anything more. She's calling out to strangers. She's calling out to passers-by, to all the continent of Africa. That hyperbole. She's not literally calling out to the whole of Africa, but it just shows how loud and vigorous her calling out is, how much she wants people to see her excitement. And the question that we kind of need to ask ourselves here is, does this excessive gratefulness point to how little she actually has? Is it maybe a moment of realizing, oh wow, she really doesn't have much, and that's why this is so exciting for her. And it goes like, so she called to all the continent of Africa to see this wonder. And we see there the comparison. He called it a discardment. He said it's purposeless, it's a trifle, it's nothing to be excited about. And she calls it a wonder. And we see the difference in perspectives there. For her, this thing is an absolute wonder. To participate in this intolerable joy, she's asking people to participate in her joy. Now, intolerable joy is an oxymoron, because joy is something that typically you want to tolerate. You want to have joy around you. You want to, experience joy. And he's saying this joy is intolerable. It's something that he doesn't want to be around. And so we need to see here that he doesn't want to be near her joy. He doesn't want to witness it anymore. And that's why I say, is he having a moment of realizing his privilege and being very uncomfortable, being very unsettled by his privilege that he's now realizing he has? And so the last couple of lines, the last 6 lines, we move away in these last 6 lines from describing what is happening to now having a deep self-reflection of what this means for people, for society. Because he says, and so for nothing is purchased loyalty and trust and the unquestioning obedience of the earth's most rare simplicity. So for nothing, the destruction of a world. What he's referring to here, and there's a lot of interpretations of this line, but that of the earth's most rare simplicity, the common kind of consensus when it comes to this line is that the earth's most rare simplicity is its people and its cultures. And in this context, it's the native indigenous people of South Africa and their cultures, that out of everything we have, money and possessions and that kind of stuff, people and their culture is the earth's most rare thing. And it's so simple, but it's something that we take for granted. It's something that we don't appreciate. It's something that regimes like the apartheid regime try to crush and try to squash. And so this reflection that he has in these last 6 lines, he's reflecting on the fact that people, this group of people of color, are giving their loyalty, are giving their trust, are giving their obedience to what was considered the superior race during apartheid, which is obviously the white group of people, but they're giving it for nothing. The apartheid regime is purchasing the loyalty and the trust and the obedience of a group of people for nothing. And so we see that antithesis there of purchased and nothing, because you can't purchase something for nothing. I mean, if you go to a store and you want to buy something and you give it to the cashier and they ring it up and then you say, oh no, but I don't actually have anything, they're going to laugh at you. You're not going to get that thing. You can't purchase something for nothing. But he's showing that the apartheid regime and the apartheid government has so degraded people and damaged their self-worth, their dignity, that there's just this unquestioning loyalty and trust and obedience. And the way it goes further is that the group of people who are in the superior kind of class also see her loyalty and trust as worth nothing due to her status. They expect it from her, they demand it from her because they see her as inferior, but they also see her as nothing. They also see what she's giving them as nothing. And so it's really this reflection on what this apartheid regime has done to the classes, to the people, and to, the social classes here. Because he says, so for nothing, the destruction of a world. That's so there is that final realization of, for nothing, it's the destruction of a world. And that can be interpreted as, we cannot sustainably grow a society in this way. Society cannot evolve, cannot expand if we are purchasing the loyalty and trust of people for nothing. We are destroying our world. We are destroying our society. And you can make that more personal. We are destroying people's individual worlds. When we look at this woman, when we look at her reality, when she lives in the apartheid regime, her world has been destroyed by it. And so one of the questions that does come out of this is the speaker perhaps missing the point of that whole concept of the happiest people are not those with the most? Like this woman shows joy because, she doesn't find her joy in possessions. She's just naturally joyful. And I suppose you could see the poem that way. Personally, I don't think so. I think that it is a moment of realization of, oh my gosh, look at my privilege, look at everything that I have, and look at this woman's, response to this very worthless thing in my eyes. And it just shows how much the apartheid regime has destroyed this woman's world. Once again, you can interpret it the way that you want, but I think based on what the poem is giving us, that is what the interpretation is there. The last little bit of analysis, when we kind of look at it, what we see here is obviously the speaker doesn't understand how this thing that is so meaningless to him has created so much happiness for this woman. And we see that his sense of reality has changed. And not necessarily that, he's now going to go out and become this incredible philanthropist or whatever, but it's just he's realized that he's living in a different reality to this woman. And their realities are very, very different. There's no real common ground in their realities. And in his reality being changed, or his sense of reality being changed, he's realizing that her world has been changed due to apartheid. We see that loss of dignity and pride and worth, and that idea of what more can she lose, and what else is there that they can take from her, and that's why she feels joy at receiving this thing. At the beginning of the poem, and in his intention of giving her this worthless thing, like I said, he sees her as subservient. And, that's why he's so uncomfortable with her joyous celebration, because why should something that is so unimportant to him be so valuable to her when he sees her as someone as inferior? How can that be? How can she not see it as something that is also worthless? How could she find value in it when he couldn't? As I said earlier, we see that class and race division during apartheid, and from that we see that idea of privilege, where he has the privilege of discarding items he no longer wants. Now, obviously, he emphasized for us that the thing was worthless. As the audience, do we know if it truly was worthless? No, we don't. It reminds me of something that I've often thought about is, like when you put leftovers in a Tupperware and you kind of forget about the leftovers, and then it gets really gross. And then when you find that Tupperware again, you're like, I'm not going to clean this. I'm rather just going to throw the whole Tupperware away. To someone in a place of privilege, that 70 Rand Tupperware doesn't mean much. You can go replace it tomorrow. It's not a problem. To someone who's maybe living on a grant of 500 Rand a month, 70 Rand is a lot of money. And so we see that difference in privilege there. He has the privilege of discarding this item he no longer wants and saying that it serves no purpose. But this woman takes it and she finds the value. She celebrates it because there's very little that she can afford and there's very little that she has. And so what she receives and what she gets, she finds value. She finds joy in receiving it. The question that I want to ask is, Alan Paton and the speaker, in making these observations, is he further demeaning Black people from his place of privilege? Is he, making them lose more dignity or that kind of stuff? Or is he trying to make people think about these divisions? In essence, is he trying to be an ally, or is he out of pocket trying to speak for a group of people of which he is not a part of? You need to ask yourself, what is his intention? What is he trying to do with the commentary that he is making in this poem? And remember, whatever you decide, you have to be able to substantiate it from the poem. And then finally, when we look at kind of these, how the tone shifts within this poem, the tone really shifts 4 times. It starts off in those first 3 lines as very matter of fact, as this is the thing, it is worthless, I don't have any use for it, that's it. Then it goes to that idea of amusement as she starts celebrating this thing. And he kind of goes, okay, well, that's a bit weird. I don't really know why she's celebrating this way. It then goes to a bit of embarrassment where he, like I said, he feels that uncomfortable kind of feeling of, oh, okay, no, but she's celebrating a bit too much now. This is too much for me. I don't want to be around this joy, that intolerable joy. And then it moves into that deep reflection of, whoa, this experience that I've just had, what does this mean? What does it mean for me? What does it mean for society? What does it mean for what we're allowing to happen? And so you want to ask yourself, what does this say about the speaker? And does it reflect those in a place of privilege? Do people who are in privilege or in a place of privilege go through these same emotions? When we are confronted with our privilege and we are confronted with our reality that is different to so many people's reality, do we have the same kind of reflection, or do we just brush it off? Do we just move past it? What does it say about the speaker? What does it say about us people in privilege? This then is a poem that This is apart from Alan Paton's Cry the Beloved Country novel that I feel is just very relevant for this poem. And this is a great way to test your understanding of the poem, to test if you actually understand what's going on. Because if you are able to compare the message of the poem to what's being said in this quote and substantiate it well, you know that you know the poem really well. And so the extract here says, "Cry the beloved country for the unborn child that is the inheritor of our fear. Let him not love the earth too deeply. Let him not laugh too gladly when the water runs through his fingers, nor stand too silent when the setting sun makes red the veldt with fire. Let him not be too moved when the birds of his land are singing, nor give too much of his heart to a mountain or a valley, for fear will rob him if he gives too much." Think about it. Think about the message. See how you can compare them to each other. Lastly, if you want to access the poetry notes, you can go to @MissShaw on Instagram and go to the link in my bio. It'll take you to my Linktree and to my Google Drive, which has got a bunch of resources on it. Or you can just scan the QR code right now and it'll take you directly to the Google Drive and you can get the poetry notes there. As always, please make sure that you are studying the poem for yourself, that you are understanding it for yourself, and that you are able to not just talk about, the poetic devices. You're able to not just talk about the line for line analysis, but that you're able to answer those critical thinking questions, that you're able to link this poem to your other scene poems. It's a great way to see if you understand the poem, is take your full poetry syllabus and see where this poem can link to other poems and see if you can explain how they link, because that'll actually help you really see if you understand what's going on. Thank you so much for watching this poetry video. A like and subscribe goes a long way for me, and I really hope that this helped you.